We all know science is not about authority. And strangely, we all know that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is the authority on climate change science. Bit of a dilemma there. Here is the IPCC. These are the figures from the horse's mouth. The chairman of the IPCC is an Indian called Dr. Pachauri, and he tours the world with this PowerPoint package, of which this is one of the slides. And what we see here is the famous temperature curve from thermometers, the ground-based temperature curve from 1860 through to 2000, has this familiar figure of cooling into the early 20th century, warming to the middle of the century, cooling again to about 1979. And then this, with a green line fitted through it, is the supposed to be alarming warming of the late 20th century. A couple of things about this graph. You can challenge the whole basis for this as to whether it's an accurate basis on which we should be looking at climate change. I won't do that. I'll accept it at face value. The second challenge, however, is the context. Now, Dr. Pachauri goes around the world and he deliberately draws, for example, this line in purple with a lower slope here, and this line in green with a higher slope, with a subliminal message, I don't know whether he says it on his feet or not, that of course it's warming faster here and this is the human-caused problem. Worse than that, he says things like 11 of the last 12 years, that's up in here, this region, rank among the 12 warmest years in the instrumental record of global temperature. Now, an intelligent schoolchild can completely dismiss that argument. It's a nonsensical argument. And I'll show you why in a second. The idea that we have a leading United Nations official touring the world, giving talks, and this is the intellectual level of his argument, is astonishing. What's even more astonishing is his reward is the Nobel Prize. And on top of that, of course, his advertising agent was included in the award. Why is that? It's because of the lack of context, and the context is twofold. Firstly, on the scale of the same 150 years, the zigzag line is the same temperature curve, but now fitted through it is the sinusoidal, multi-decadal climate pattern that every intelligent meteorologist, climatologist and climate scientist knows about. And to argue that 11 out of the 12 warmest years are up in here is just like arguing most of the warm days of the year come before and after Midsummer's Day. Of course they do. Most of the warm part of every day comes around noon to 2 o'clock. Of course it does. This is a totally absurd, unscientific argument because it ignores context. And the context it ignores is the context of 150 years of data. But then there's the next problem, which is ignoring the real context, which is real climate change, which doesn't take place over 150 years. It takes place over lengths of time of thousands to millions of years. This is a graph of temperature of the North Atlantic Ocean, of the Pacific Ocean from 6 million years ago until today. In red, the temperature of the water of the ocean. We see back here, between 6 and 3.5 million years ago, for an extended period of time, first, temperature was always jigging and jogging up and down because change is what climate does. It's never static. But nonetheless, jigging up and down at a level that on this scale of 10 degrees is about 2 to 3 degrees warmer than where we are today. Here, this dotted line is today's temperature. We see about 3.5 million years ago the start of a planetary-wide cooling, on top of which the little jigs and jags got bigger and bigger and turned into these huge glacial interglacial cycles. We now live in the warm part of this cycle. 20,000 years ago, tick of time in geology, the world was about 6-7 degrees cooler and we were in the grip of an ice age. You will note that the magnitude of these previous warm interglacials, many of them, is higher than it is today. You will note that in general the temperature was 2 to 3 degrees higher several million years ago. The argument from the IPCC that there is anything unusual about either the rate at which warming is occurring in the late 20th century or the magnitude of the late 20th century warming peak is just nonsense. On top of that, if we're going to have dangerous global warming, we have to have global warming. And as most of you in the audience are aware, if we look at the graph now from 2002 to 2008, this is some satellite data, a very high quality, and one of the ground data records. They're plotted in parallel, and we see in both cases temperatures now been declining since 2002, and in fact, in some ways, since 1998. Why? Because the sun is currently in a cool phase, or an inactive phase, and that translates to cooling temperatures. Over that same period of time, carbon dioxide's increased by 4%. The hypothesis that the IPCC examined, it was set up to examine, and it was a good idea to ask the question, is, are human emissions having a dangerous effect on global warming? Here's a test of the hypothesis, and the hypothesis fails. The IPCC now has not a single factual argument left for dangerous global warming. The rate is not unusual, the magnitude is not unusual, and indeed it's actually cooling at the moment when carbon dioxide is going up. Aha, but what they do have, of course, is the computer model. Here they are. And the computer models, this is the same historic temperature curve, flattened down because I've got a condensed scale, and here are the projections into the future that the IPCC now use to terrify the public with. The red line in the middle is the mean of their projections. That's sort of saying, well, the average of all the wrong answers is the right answer. It's an interesting argument. But whatever, this is what real-life temperature is doing. And it's actually, these are the error bars, the dotted lines. The real temperature cooling is outside the error bars. So the model projections, again, are disproved. This is strange, because I would have sworn I read in the Canberra Times yesterday that there's this huge problem with global warming, and nobody wrote a letter contradicting it. Society around us seems to be completely convinced this is a huge problem. Sociology is this. What are we teaching our young people? And I'm going to take somebody, my daughter, from the age of 5 through into the mature adult workforce. And she starts by clicking on the ABC website and finding Prof. Cricking's greenhouse calculator. It's part of a thing called Planet Slayer. And if I click here, I can start. And this is what I bring up when I start. I've now got 1 through 11 screens of questions like this. How do I usually get around? The average is a car, a light user. Well, I might be a good lass and I might walk to school every day, so I click this box. And as you click this and go on to the next screen, these pigs change in size accordingly. And this is your average Aussie pig. That's you, folks. This is your virtuous little green pig. I'm not sure if there's any of those in the room. And this, of course, is you as you work your way through. Now, if you click all the average boxes, when you get to the end, the pig explodes in a shower of blood. Here are the bits of blood left. And this 8-year-old child is told that she will use her share of the planet's resources in 9 years. This website, not surprisingly, has been up for 2 years now. It's attracted worldwide commentary, and one comment was, I don't know where to begin except to say that when we see things like this, we should complain loudly and incessantly. The ABC has crossed a line beyond science, beyond decency, indeed beyond rational thought. Now, I know there's 1 or 2 Kiwis in the audience, so I don't want to think they're going to get away, because here's the Kiwi equivalent site. You can see it's been designed by a professional graphic design consultant. We use a lot of electric power in our daily lives. Our factories use a lot of energy. More and more people drive around in bigger cars, you naughty people. All of this is bad. And then we flick through a few pages and we get to stuff like this. This is supposed to be teaching our children science. It's propaganda indoctrination of the worst sort. Where does it come from? www.government.New Zealand. Now, people in this room will have differing views about Jim Henson being allowed to look for models in schools. It's been a hot issue in the papers lately. That pales into insignificance. That is trivial compared with the intellectual terrorism that Australian, New Zealand and other school children in the West have been subjected to on these environmental issues, and especially global warming, since about 1990. Think about it.